Welcome back to the Messy Reformation. My name's Jason Rice, and I'm the lead pastor at Faith Community CRC in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. My co-host is Willie Cronky. He's a member at Pease CRC in Pease, Minnesota. We're just a couple of guys who love the Christian Reformed Church and want to see Reformation happen in our denomination. But we realize that whenever Reformation happens in the history of the church, things get messy. And things continue to be messy in the Christian Reformed Church. So we're taking the opportunity to have conversations with pastors throughout the Christian Reformed Church to find out what's going on in our denomination, but also to talk about what Reformation might look like. It's also important for you to know that you are our marketing plan. We rely on you to spread the word about what we're doing at the Messy Reformation. We rely on you to share our content. And we rely on you to give us 5-star reviews and give good feedback for our podcast. You are the marketing plan. You can also support us financially on Patreon or Substack. All of the money raised is used to further the mission and the platform of the Messy Reformation. With all that said, we're going to get to this week's episode where Chad, Aaron, and I talk about the overtures coming to Synod 2025. Well, everyone, we've got an interesting conversation happening today. We've got another repeat of a couple of guests who, I don't know, it's probably been years since you guys have been on the podcast. Not because, we don't like you, but we just like to have other pastors on. But as we're preparing for Synod 2025, we're getting closer and closer. I think we're a little over 2 weeks away from the opening Zoom ceremony of Synod 2025. So things are really starting to ramp up for that. And there's a lot of conversations starting to happen. And I've had a lot of people reaching out to me, even just wondering, like, what should we be paying attention to leading up to Synod 2025? What overtures are coming? And I've said I've been so engrossed in it the last few years that I have not been so intensely studying all of the overtures. So I'm a little more out of the loop this year. So I wanted to bring in a couple of guys who are, they live right in the Grand Rapids bubble area. And so they know what's going on in the CRC and what's happening coming up to Synod. And so I thought, let's bring them in. We'll have a conversation about some of these overtures coming up. So we've got Chad Steenwyk and Aaron Vriesman. So thanks, guys, for being willing to come on and letting me make fun of you a little bit too.
That's all right. Thanks for having us. And
glad to be here.
Outside the bubble, we like to say. We're not in the bubble, just outside the bubble.
Yes, exactly that. I'm Classis Zealand. Chad is Classis Holland. These are worlds away from Grand Rapids, as far as we're concerned.
Those are words that come out of people who are in the bubble. Sorry. No,
totally. We get
it. So, talking before this, just kind of catching up. One of the things that I think is important for people to realize coming into Synod 2025 is that we're actually starting to get back to normal levels of overtures coming into Synod. I think, Chad, didn't you say how many overtures came to Synod 2018?
It was 2017. I had looked. There was 18 overtures and 3 communications.
Okay, so 2017, 18 overtures, 3 communications. And then, of course, we had a few synods off. So 2022 was going to be kind of a crazy one. And this year, so we've had anywhere from like 70 something overtures coming to Synod the last few years. And this year we have 29 coming, right? Am I right on that number?
That's the number I have here. Yep.
Yeah. So, which I've been teasing everybody saying, my advisory committee in 2023, we had 33 overtures just in my committee alone. And so they should be able to get their work done this year, right?
But Jason, maybe just to poke at you a little bit, most of those were deferred to Synod 2024, weren't they?
Oh, ouch. Almost. Yeah, most of them were deferred to Synod 2024. But
I'll take my own blame in that. So
Yeah, I still have to make you a plaque. I have a design made for Chad to give him the honorary record for most delegates to resign underneath his chairmanship of Synod. And so
I'll put it right next to my gavel. So
Yeah, that's funny. I hadn't even thought about that. That yeah, most of my overtures, like 90% of them, got deferred to the next year.
Oh, Jason.
Oh, brutal. Well, anyway, so we've had some pretty wild synods, and we've said coming out of 2024, it felt like we finally turned a corner in the CRC. And I think even just looking at some of the overtures coming this year, my own little glimpse, it definitely does feel like we've turned a corner. And just the fact that there's, half the number of overtures this year as from last year shows that we're kind of settling into a new normal. Is that what you guys are kind of getting the feel of as well?
Absolutely. And it does feel like we're kind of getting back to kind of a normal flow, although there's a good number that are related to some of the topics we've had over the last few years. But even that is waning as we sort of settle into a new unity together as a denomination.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that just seems like the overtures of this year are looking for a stability after the following years. So I think that's kind of what we're seeing. We're looking for okay, how do we live into the decisions of the previous years?
Yeah. Yeah, and again, you guys have been, looking at these more than I have, but just in the quick glimpse that I gave, it does feel like that's kind of where we're at. I think there's a few overtures we'll probably get at. They're still holding hope that they can overturn some of what we've been done. But most of the overtures seem like we're just trying to settle into a new foundation. And I think what Chad mentioned earlier, into this new unity that we have as a denomination. So I'd be curious, what's one of the big kind of broad categories that you see coming up at this synod that you think would be helpful to start talking about?
Go ahead, Chad.
I think just even thinking in light of the last few years, there's a whole segment of overtures and maybe one or two of the communications that address the covenant for office bearers, and then underneath that, kind of the gravamen process or gravamen. Still don't remember how to say it, but I think there's a lot of those, and much of it has to do with should we re-sign the covenant for office bearers, and do we take away the word fully from the word agree to the confessions and creeds? Couple of things that are just related around that. I mean, there was an interesting overture about having a feast for those who come back into compliance, or who repent of what has put them under limited suspension. But that was a kind of a fascinating overture that just sort of stuck out from the others. But one of the pieces I think that is worthy of a little discussion, a couple of overtures have been asking for a third category of gravamen. I know in the past it had been kicked around under the title of a confessional exception gravamen. These have come under the title of confessional submission gravamen. And really, I think that I don't know that it's going to go anywhere, because confessional exception gravamen, which is essentially the same thing, I believe, really fell flat in previous synods. So there's not much new grounds to take something like this up. But a confessional submission gravamen would just basically say, yes, hey, I disagree, but I'll submit to what the denomination's position is and in their interpretation of these confessions, and I'll teach accordingly. And on the surface, that sounds like the right thing to do. And I think that's what we have agreed to do when we do file a confessional difficulty gravamen. We say, even though we're struggling with it, we're still going to teach from the position of the denomination and what we have covenanted together over all these years. But you got to think about, when you're just saying, I'm going to teach something I don't really believe, and I think we've had these conversations informally before, brothers, but that's just a hard thing to do. It always comes out backwards when you're trying to teach something you don't really believe. If I was to teach a credo Baptist position, I could teach the mechanics of it, but man, that's not in my heart. Paedo baptism is going to come out, and so I'm going to kind of say things, and even the way I teach about credo baptism is going to be framed in a certain way. And so is that even something that's viable for a long-term permanent position of one of our leaders, one of our ministers or elders or deacons in the denomination? So I don't know that this group of overtures needs much more comment, but I think some of those things are going to be things Synod will have to just work its way through.
One of the interesting things about those two overtures that Chad just mentioned is that one of them comes from Classis Columbia, which is historically a traditional conservative, whatever label you want to call it, sort of a classis, and the other one comes from Classis Toronto, which has been known for pushing the boundaries. So I think that will be interesting.
From Columbia, right, Aaron?
19 is Toronto, and 17 is Columbia.
Yeah, and did they? So of course, I've been neck deep in the whole gravamen thing since my committee failed. But what did they propose as bringing new grounds on this? Because as far as I can see, this was mostly, I mean, there's a new category they're suggesting, but it's really a category that was rejected, as far as I've seen, from previous synods by saying, no, we're not going to allow someone to permanently hold, right? That was even one of the points, I'd have to remember it, but it was a confessional difficulty gravamen is not an exception. Or did it even say we do not allow any exceptions? What was the point one from, I don't have it on me now, but from last year's synod, right? I remember the first item that they voted on before changing the church order said, we do not allow exceptions to our confessions or something like that.
I don't have the wording up here either. Do you have it in front of you, Aaron, at all?
I don't know. I would have to dive into it. Let me see. Yeah.
So I'm talking the same way you are, Jason, but that was the case. That came out clear that we don't have a avenue for exceptions or permanent exceptions. Yeah. We have this confessional difficulty time where we can wrestle with things, and we are going to wrestle with things. We all wrestle with things, but we have a process for that, and for just kind of talking through and coming back into covenant with one another. But yeah, as I look at these two overtures, I don't see any new grounds per se. Things are worded a little differently, but in the end, it's all about, this just allows local elders and deacons to serve with integrity, even if they can't affirm everything. And this comes back to that word fully affirm, right? Or fully agree with. Mm-hmm. So I think they're appealing to some of the diverse contexts that we're in. And I don't know. I guess those are the things that we have seen before. And as Synod has wrestled with these, Synod has decided, no, we don't allow for exceptions. Now, it's interesting. One of the other overtures, I think it's 12, talks about removing the word fully agree. And I'm trying to find the daylight between fully agree and agree, as if those are two different things. I think fully agree just adds the emphasis of what agree already says. And so even that language comes up in Overture 17. So I think that's not, that doesn't mean much.
Yeah. Yeah. Aaron, you did find the exact wording of what was approved last year. Why don't you let us read that off for us?
It says that Synod affirm that confessional difficulty gravamina are not meant nor should be used as an exception to the confessions. And then there's a couple grounds here. But that's what I'm guessing that what these two overtures are bringing up is they're inventing a new category. And so I'm thinking that they're raising something new and not repeating an old discussion. In what they're doing. So I'm thinking that they are not going to see the need for new grounds.
Yeah, I think I could say on a real technical level, they're offering something new because that other statement was directly related to confessional difficulty gravamen. And yet, it does seem to just be rehashing what we've rehashed. If you think of all the different overtures that were sent, there were numerous overtures calling for being able to hold these kind of exceptions in perpetuity, and Synod very decisively said, no, that's not what we're going to do. There's going to be a timeline on this. And yeah.
The hard part is that, sorry, go ahead, Chad.
I was going to say one of the best written overtures that I saw about putting forward a case for confessional exception gravamen came through Classes Holland, church right up the street here. But even there too, it was still submission, right? So confessional exception gravamen was, even though you have this exception, you'll still submit to the denominational position. So from that standpoint, that's where it seems to be the same. We're playing the same ball game here. So
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut you off too, Aaron. So what were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to point out that just the way that our confessions and submission to these confessions are structured, they're taken as a unit. And so if we start saying, well, we can make an exception on baptism, well, that's a significant part of the Heidelberg Catechism. What else could we take exception to there? The Catechism goes all the way down the Apostles' Creed. What parts of the Apostles' Creed could you deny and still serve under this submission gravamen? The way that we're set up doesn't really set us up well to have distinctions between essentials and not essentials. You take it as a whole or not at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I still, people have heard me make this argument over and over again, but I can't find a way to be able to say, on the one hand, I wholeheartedly believe and promise to promote and defend something I don't agree with. I can't find daylight between that. And so we've just, part of who we've always been and who we've determined that we are, again, is that we're going to be more of a strict subscriptionist denomination where we're going to hold to these things and not allow a permanent exception. And so, I think it's interesting seeing those coming, and yet I would hope that they would, not get a lot of traction, that people would say, no, we've already discussed these things in the past. Is there anything else coming up regarding the covenant for office bearers up at this synod that you think would be important to talk about?
One topic that keeps replaying is the signing of the covenant for office bearers. It was made a requirement that this be done once a year in our classis meetings. Honestly, that feels like a bit of a strange request from Synod. And why I feel it's a bit strange is I think it should be done every single classis meeting. Some classes stand up and they affirm the covenant for office bearers, which is in essence doing the same thing as re-signing it. I think that would be just a good practice for all of us. We talked even in our earlier conversation about every time we gather for worship, we talk about it as covenant renewal. That's one of the things I've appreciated greatly about John Whitfleet, right? Is he kind of has brought some of those notions back into our worship. And covenant renewal, or even the idea of every time we speak the Apostles' Creed, we're reprofessing our faith, and all of these things, we're kind of just coming back to it and reiterating this is who we are. And so the same, I think, holds true for the covenant for office bearers, that, boy, we could do it every single time we gathered as a classis. We do it every single time we gather as a synod. We do stand, for those things. So I don't see much difference between signing and standing if we're going to really deal with this with integrity.
And I would agree. I would just add to that I didn't find, reading some of these overtures about re-signing the covenant for office bearers, I was actually looking to try to understand where they were coming from. And I had a really hard time even understanding their rationale. Synod is asking office bearers to remake the covenant. Synod is therefore breaking covenant with the office bearers of the denomination. If nothing has changed, then there should be no reason to require people to make a commitment to something they have already committed to. I don't think that these were well written overtures, because I'm having a hard time even understanding where they're coming from.
Which one are you reading from now, Aaron?
This one is 11.
Overture 11.
Yeah. That's Ontario Southwest.
That does seem a bit strange. You think about even in your own marriage, you tell your wife you love her more than just on your wedding day. I mean, it doesn't seem to be problematic to have to restate this.
Yeah.
As
Well,
a-
I mean, I don't know anybody either when, I know of many couples who on their, 30th, 40th wedding anniversary, they hold a whole ceremony and renew their vows and everything. And nobody looks at that and says, you're breaking covenant. You're proving that the other ones were invalid. Everybody looks at that and says, oh, you're just recommitting to one another. And it's actually it's not a, it's not a new thing. How many times did God renew his covenant promises with his people throughout the Old and New Testament, right? Over and over again. He would come and say, here's a ceremony, here's something happening that we're renewing this together. And so I do think some things will get clarified. I think there was some confusion coming out of Synod, right? On what is it? Is there a requirement that you actually have to put pen to paper and sign on a line once a year, or is standing enough? And different, I think we probably just need some clarity coming out of Synod regarding that. Personally, my preference would be what we've done in Classis Wisconsin. I said we might even be breaking a little bit, but we have just had everybody stand. We've read through the covenant for office bearers and had everybody stand in affirmation of it. And we've just decided that we will do that at every meeting. And we're doing that not to try to get around the requirement, but because we think it's actually better than we could just have a sheet of paper as delegates walk in, they write their name on it and go in. But it seems like more of a sober moment where we're saying, here's what we believe as delegates here. Now stand in affirmation of that. And so that's what I would like to see that. It's basically the same thing we do at Synod every year. We're just asking for people to do the same thing in their Classis level. And I think that just makes a lot of sense.
And that also kind of draws the beauty of it. That's what it's meant to be. It's meant to be something almost worshipful, and when you do that together, standing in affirmation together, there is something beautiful, as we dwell together in unity. It's meant to be for the praise and glory of God. So I like that as well.
And especially when we're talking about stuff that we disagree on, there's something cool about standing all together and saying we agree on these things, even if we disagree on other things. Yeah. So I like that.
Yeah, it brings unity, right? And it's not, a couple months ago, I did a talk at the Three Forums Conference on the Canons of Dort. And one of the things I pointed out in that talk was after the Canons of Dort finished and approved the canons, they made all of the ministers and teachers re-sign the covenant for office bearers in light of this new teaching, saying, here's where we're going to do this. And that was a big part of their reasoning, was actually to help foster this unity around these teachings in a church that had been divided for a long time. So again, even the authors of the Canons of Dort did not see this as a breaking of a covenant to re-sign it. They again saw it as an affirmation of unity in the church. So
it does seem to make sense when you have a confessional discussion. We've had a confessional discussion over the last several years, and let's come back together. Let's put ourselves together. This is what we've decided. So let's move forward in this as well. And I think it's beautiful. Jason, you had said something earlier too. I think this is an important thing just to remember from an ongoing basis. A synod makes a bunch of decisions. They get tested over the next year. I mean, they're put into practice. I don't think any of us, and we've all served as delegates to Synod. None of us are serving as delegates this year in 2025. But when those decisions are put into play, they don't always work exactly like you planned them to work. And so you do have to kind of come back and tweak things and massage things. Even if the substance doesn't change, you think, well, there's a better way to do this. And so I think that's been a big part of the last few years. I know some can get frustrated by that. But I think it's natural, and it's just how things work. And it happens in many areas of life, but especially when you're getting 180 delegates together, however many we have in that room. yeah, it takes a while for those things to play out in all 1,000 churches that we have across North America here.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And people get frustrated because it just takes a long time because we only meet once a year. Unlike in a business, as they do these things, they have board meetings regularly. So they make a decision and then they're like, oh no, that didn't go the way we planned, so they can pivot a little bit quicker. But in the church, it takes a long time to kind of fix some of the little tweaks that need to get made. So, and I think another conversation that kind of flows from this, and I've mentioned, needing to pay attention to it coming up to Synod 2025 is, Synod 2024 told like the COD and Calvin Seminary and Calvin University, all right, you need to look at your policies and kind of bring them into alignment with the decisions that we've made. And so now we've kind of seen some of their responses coming out, and they're coming to Synod. What should people kind of take note of coming out of those three boards and agencies?
Well, having read the Calvin response, it was quite lengthy and verbose.
The university, right?
Calvin University. Thank you. And it seemed to be very professionally written, and seemed to try to be accommodating and at the same time saying, you guys need to stay in your space. This is the academy. You guys are the church, and these are different spheres. So there was some resistance there in all of the polite language that was in there. So if you read through the Calvin University report, you will notice that that there is some resistance to what Synod has said, kind of a you guys need to stay in your lane sort of language.
One of the things I noticed from that same report, Aaron, for the university, they seem to have a two-tier approach to this. The delegates that are elected from the classes of the CRC, those would be those who would have to be in alignment with the covenant for office bearers or the equivalent, which I know the Calvin University board has. But then there's other board members who they fill these positions of trustee on the board because of specialty, or alumni or just different categories. So it's almost like a half and half split. They acknowledge the necessity of those that come from the classes, that come from the CRC, the importance of and the benefit of subscription to the creeds and confession. Where it seems inconsistent to me is like, why wouldn't that matter for the other half of the board as well? If you believe that this Reformed faith that has been handed down to us, upon which Calvin was built, right, and many of our Christian schools and all those sorts of things, and I believe personally that has led to a wonderful educational system. As we explore the world and we expect to find God in every square inch of creation, even throwing some Kuyperian language in there. I don't know why it would be good for half of the board and then not good for the entirety of the board. So there seemed to be an inconsistency there, not just in practice, but philosophically. I would love to see that pulled together, because it's hard to say, well, yeah, we believe these foundations of our university, that we can build upon them for the future, when we say, well, it matters for half of our board, but not for the other half of the board. So really, what are you saying? And so I think you go back to what Aaron had said, that feels like they're just trying to keep a lot of people happy, which is often what happens. But we also know where that goes in the future. It never really produces flourishing. And so I would challenge the university to really settle into who we are and move forward.
Well, and how many universities that have started out as institutions of the church to try to educate people for teaching and ministry, and then became independent of the church, and then went down a very different path. So Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, Dartmouth, Brown, Rutgers, Duke, we could go on. They are not Church affiliated schools anymore. And those are just some of the major ones. We need to, if Calvin wants to be a distinct university in a time when the academy is becoming increasingly competitive when it comes to finding students, because there is decreasing enrollments in general across higher education. Calvin's going to need to be a unique institution, and to be unique, I think, means being attached to something like the Christian Reformed Church. So I think it's even in Calvin University's best interest to stay connected to the Christian Reformed Church and what the Christian Reformed Church's beliefs and stances are.
That is one thing that I did appreciate about their report, is they did express that interest, right? They want to draw closer to the Christian Reformed Church. And I think
indeed
it's good to see that not just in words, but in actions. And it really needs to begin with a board. I mean, that's where the connection is. And the board is the one that oversees the university. And I'm an alumni of Calvin University, Calvin College back in the day. In the fall, I'll have 2 of my sons that will be enrolled at Calvin University. And so I have personal vested interest, but I think even just for the broader church, let's stand upon what we have. The CRC and the Reformed faith has something wonderful to offer. And I think even the Christian Reformed Church's interpretation, as even though we're close cousins to the Presbyterians, there's a different perspective that we can bring that complements, I believe, many of the other good, sound Christian universities and Reformed universities and colleges that we have. But that would give a place for Calvin to flourish.
Yeah. And well, let me make 2 points on that. One thing I think it's important for people to know, I was just pulling up the Calvin University board. There's 31 members of the board, and 15 of those are alumni. So half of them are alumni board members, and so they don't come from the regions at all.
Of the denomination, right?
Yeah, so they're just alumni. And then there's actually only 6 that are appointed directly from the classes in various regions. There's 6 regions. And then there's over above that, there's 10 like regional at-large delegates. And I'm not exactly certain on how those regional at-large delegates kind of get appointed, but I don't, just from my own understanding of my role as stated clerk, I don't think we elect them to be an at-large delegate. I think they're kind of picked from the regions. And so the board, just the composition of Calvin University's board, there's only really 6 board members out of 31 that are coming directly from the classes. Mm-hmm. And so for them to say, well, those 6 have to really hold tightly to the confessions, but the other 25, that's not even half. We're talking like a quarter of the board members less, 20%. And so I don't think that's helpful. I also think one of the points that keeps being made is, well, we're an academic institution and we need to have freedom. And nobody is saying you can't have freedom to study widely and broadly other things. You just can't teach in contradiction to what our confessions are saying as a teacher. So study widely. I mean, I tell people, like, some people would look at my podcast list and they'd be maybe shocked at some of the podcasts I listen to, because I listen to crazy stuff. I'm reading a book on game theory right now. Like I read widely, I study widely, and yet because I just like to learn broadly, and yet I'm not going to teach in contradiction to our confessions. And so actually I don't think a strict subscriptionist approach hinders anybody from being able to have academic integrity and to study widely and broadly. So I think it's kind of a false accusation, really.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Jason, because I think that is a misnotion that has been perpetuated wide. And I think it's sometimes come in reaction to what Synod has done. And it's a narrow reaction. It's a shallow reaction. But it's sort of like the first reaction, like, oh, you're cinching down that we can't talk about anything, we can't have discussions about anything. I have not seen that even in the most conservative contexts in the Christian Reformed Church. That they've cinched down that much that you can't talk about things. No, I think you framed that really, really well. And I think that would actually be the great benefit of strict subscription, is that you can talk about all of these things, but you have a foundation that you go back to. And so we have lenses by which we look at everything in the world, right? And we can understand them because we understand the redemptive arc of Scripture. We understand that there is sin. We understand redemption. We understand consummation. All of these things frame how we look at every subject matter, and that's the beauty of a Reformed Christian education.
Yeah. I think something, and I don't remember, I didn't get to look at Calvin University's report, but I know it gets brought up quite often, is that Calvin University came up with a little booklet that talks about confessional subscription and academic freedom or something like that. And so they've kind of tried to walk this out, and Synod 2014 did affirm that document, right? And so I know Calvin University has pointed back to that. They kind of keep pointing back to that, saying, well, Synod has told us we're doing what we should do, and so we're going to keep doing that. And that might be something that would be helpful for someone to look into a little bit deeper and write an overture to just maybe clarify that in light of where we're at right now. And so that's not coming this year, but if somebody feels like writing an overture for Synod 2026, it might be worth revisiting that.
There, you got your work cut out for you, Jason.
I don't think I want to.
We're hoping one of the listeners of this podcast will do that.
That's right. There's some people that just love to write overtures.
And they're good at it. Let go for it. Can we shift to Calvin Seminary for a bit? Just
that was my hope.
I think one thing that maybe a lot of people don't understand is that Calvin University and Calvin Theological Seminary are two distinct institutions with separate boards. They sit on the same campus, so a lot of times they get melded together. And at one time, they were one institution. But the Calvin Theological Seminary Board, which just met this past week, and so their response to Synod this year, and I'm going to just do the broadest brushstroke, seems to me the same thing they said in previous years. I don't find there's much difference there. What do you guys think about their response to Synod 2024?
I did not read the Calvin Seminary report, so I'm going to defer to others here.
My gut and I haven't dove deeply into it, which is why I'm interviewing you experts. But my gut, as I skimmed over it, was the same response we've kind of gotten from Calvin Seminary multiple times. We've already discussed this. We don't have to do anything differently. And so that's kind of, we put out, what I've heard repeatedly from the seminary is we did a forum back in 2017 or 2018 on sexuality and proved that we were orthodox on this. And following Synod 2022, we put out a statement on this. And so you're asking us to kind of redo what we've already done. And yet the response from Synod and from myself has been, well, you haven't been as clear as you think you've been because there's a lot of confusion out there. And so, we I say, as a pastor, I don't get the luxury of just, if my congregation comes to me and says, we don't understand where you're at on this, I don't get to say, I told you that like a couple years ago. I don't need to clarify it again. No, you have to do better clarifying it this time so that people actually understand where you're at in and of this. And so, I got Calvin Theological Seminary it felt like they were saying, we've already figured this out. We're not having to make any changes because we've already said where we're at on these things.
I got the same sense as well. And they're like, hey, we are abiding by the covenant for office bearers as understood by Synod. And I think officially they are. I think where the rub comes is we have enough seminarians that come through that are wondering about this, or you hear people that are engaged with Calvin Seminary and they're just not clear. So I think, they need to be clear, especially in light of the last few years. Things have come to the surface that just simply need to be readdressed, and we should be okay readdressing things and not be offended when somebody says, remind me again, where are you? Or Can you confirm where you are? We just live in that day and age. And, this has come up many, many times in synod discussions, but we're in a low trust environment. We want to build that trust. We need that trust. And so part of rebuilding that trust would just be simply to come straight forward and say, yes, this is where we are making sure that we are in alignment, and we're clearly in alignment with the denomination. This is what we're doing with new hires. These are some of the things we're considering as we evaluate our staff, or as we do see things published on social media or conversations that happen with staff members or faculty that raise questions. Let us hear how you're addressing that. And I think that would do a lot to build trust with the seminary back into the denomination. And we need that because our seminary still is actively involved and does educate a good number of our pastors. And so we want to have a good, trusting relationship with the seminary.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the frustrations is whenever it's an argument from silence, I'll say, so it's not a strong argument, but whenever you're talking to somebody and saying, remind me that you're in alignment with what we decided, and they're like, I don't have to remind you again. You get a strong feeling like you're not really in agreement with this, because if you were excited about the decisions that we just made, you would be excited to talk about the ways in which you're bringing your institution into alignment with the decisions that you've made. And so the fact that you keep kind of like holding us at arm's length and saying, nah, we don't really need to talk about that, it just makes you feel like maybe you're not. And I've said, to build trust, just like be excited about what's happening in the CRC, not so holding everything at arm's length. That would do a lot. And so we had worked through that. That was one of the recommendations coming out of my committee back in 2023 that didn't get brought to the floor, but we were asking Calvin Seminary again to clarify its position because there was a lot of confusion on that. And we wanted them to build trust with the denomination. And so I would say, just to be fair, like, of course, Jewel Maidenblick and the board, they're like, of course we want the denomination to trust us. It's not like we're saying we don't care about whether you trust us. But I just don't know if we have a real clarity or agreement maybe on what it takes to rebuild some of that trust in the denomination. And so, yeah, it'd be my hope that the board would be clearer on some of these things. And I think maybe that goes to another thing that I noticed, and you had mentioned earlier too. There is an overture kind of regarding how we compose these boards in the CRC. Do you want to talk about that, Aaron or Chad?
I'll talk about it because it came out of my classes. There is an overture basically asking that a synod set up a specific advisory board to interview or go over all of the people who are going to be sitting on the boards of various agencies and institutions of the CRC. And I think the most maybe pertinent experience of a synod delegate is that you are asked to elect board members to, Calvin University, Calvin Seminary, board of trustees, and others that you have no idea who these people are. You're given like a paragraph of some other boards that they've served on, and that's it. And everything else is just names. So really, how do you vote for somebody that you know so little about them, and yet they're going to be on boards making significant decisions for these institutions and agencies? So the idea was to have an advisory committee that just interviewed, sat down with, talked with all of these people running for the boards, and then to give recommendations to the broader body at plenary to elect those. And that's the idea here. We want to be able to know who we're electing and who is going on these boards, instead of just looking at a name and some of the other places that they've served and just assume that everything else is fine. we don't elect anybody else like that. So we should be doing more investigating on that.
I can speak to that too. And this is not from my classes, but I appreciate this overture. And speaking from two perspectives, one as a synodical delegate in the past, agree with Aaron, you get a lot of names, and these elections happen so fast on the floor of Synod that you don't have any time to even ask about anybody or even talk to your neighbor about, hey, do you know any of these people? Do you have any recommendations? The other perspective, I am up for election on the EIRC board, the Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations Committee this year. And so I had to submit some information on a Google form, which was good. They brought that. And then each of these boards has their own sort of, I don't know what they call them, but a trustee committee, those that vet the nominees. And then each board themselves chooses who is to be put forward before Synod. Now, that's a common board practice, absolutely. But I know for myself that the only information or conversations I've had with anybody have been what I submitted on that Google form. I know sometimes the argument is made at Synod, well, we're going to trust these committees, and we should trust our committees. We should trust who's on there. But also, these committees are not doing anything really more than what Synod is seeing. So it's not as though I was brought in for an interview for this position or the others that are being considered as well. And so if that was happening, then there would be a bit of different confidence, but none of that's happening. But it is ultimately Synod's responsibility. And to make good decisions, Synod needs to have information. I think back in the day, when the denomination was, 200 churches, more concentrated, even in the Midwest and Iowa and some of these other enclaves, you probably knew everybody. When everybody did go to Calvin College and got their degree from there, so you intertwined with people, so you kind of knew who was living in New Jersey, even though you were from Chicagoland. I think we're in a very different day, and as our denomination has grown and become more diverse and spread and just in different places, we just simply don't know each other personally the way we did before. And okay. I think this overture has some really good merit that I think delegates should very much consider and think through.
Yeah, it's really adapting to our becoming less and less Dutch, right? Or even less and less, to use a really negative phrase, inbred, where we don't know everybody. I mean, there's still it does get kind of wild, the Dutch bingo that still happens, but that's becoming less and less the case. And we shouldn't be sad. We just have to adapt accordingly, that right. We don't know everybody coming up. And we have to do our due diligence. And yeah, I remember in 2022, when I was a first time delegate getting that list, it felt like, I don't know how many names are on it. It felt like there was like 100 names on that thing. And I'm like, I don't know any of these people. And their bio is unhelpful. None of the bios really talks about whether they're qualified for this position or not. I don't know. I ended up just deferring because I'm like, I can't vote yes or no for this person. So I'm like, well, that's not a helpful position to be either. So I'm actually really excited about it. It's been one of these conversations that's been coming up more and more since 2022 that, wow, these boards have a lot of authority and a lot of power. We need to be just more intentional about who's on our boards. And this is a good step in the right direction. I remember and that came out of 2022 because there were some boards that were making decisions, right? That people were unhappy with. And the response was often, well, you elected the board members. And people said, I don't even remember talking about the board member that's from our region. How did they get on there? And so, I think as I rebuke us regularly, we were negligent, I think a little bit. We were just kind of rubber stamping. Oh, I don't want to serve on a board. Anybody who wants to do that can. And so we need to not be negligent. And I think this is a good step in that direction. And is there a talk in the overture about who should be on this kind of Synod board advisory team?
No, it just gives some examples of some things to talk about. Like one of the ones that I think is significant is I've been asking them, what is the gospel? Can you articulate the gospel? It's surprising how many people, you ask them to articulate the gospel and you'll get law. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. That's not the gospel. That's the law that tells us our misery. And so I just think, you have hearing how somebody might articulate the gospel, or their love for the Reformed faith, or their appreciation for the Christian Reformed Church, or this board that they're going to serve on. Those are all relevant things that would really help voters vote for one or another candidates.
Yeah. I want to move on and talk. One of the other things that we've talked about over the last year to kind of be paying attention to this upcoming synod is our relationship with the RCA. That was, there was a lot of conversation about it last year. I think it got delegated to the EIRC to bring back a proposal, but I think I also saw there's an overture about it as well, right? So we have an overture, and then I didn't look to see what the recommendation coming from EIRC is, but why don't you guys talk about what's that conversation looking like heading up to 2025?
So, I read the report from the EIRC, and they essentially said, everybody, we shouldn't do anything. We should keep things the way they are, because essentially, when you are an RCA minister serving in the CRC, you have to sign the covenant for office bearers anyways, and so there should be no problem being an RCA minister serving in the CRC. That was kind of the big. I'm not doing justice to the whole report,
Sure,
but that was the essence of it. And honestly, the RCA of 2025 is not even the RCA of 2024, let alone 2020. The RCA has lost 60% of its membership by their own reports, and almost all of those people are now part of the Kingdom Network and the Alliance of Reformed Churches, which have explicit statements on marriage and sexuality that are in line with the CRC's stance on it. And the EIRC would point out that the RCA still has the same stance that it's always had, so nothing has changed. But everybody knows that stance is not enforced. They have a law in the books that means nothing in practice. And so, as somebody who went to Western Theological Seminary in the early aughts, I know that the RCA is a Big Tent sort of organization, that they like to have a variety of people. And what has happened in the last few years is that the RCA has essentially said, we're going to have this stance, but we're not going to enforce it at any level, even though there are many ministers who are performing same-sex marriages and so forth. And that's an unsustainable position to take. And so many people have left. So this relationship really needs to be reevaluated, because this is a different RCA today than it was years ago, even 1 year ago, for that matter.
Aaron, you were saying, that they have a position that is, in essence, the same on the books as the Christian Reformed Church, but they don't enforce it. And I think you would agree with us. They deliberately don't enforce it. I mean, I think that's part of just the spirit of the RCA.
Yes.
But I think this also goes back to even some more fundamental differences that we maybe haven't reckoned with well over the course of history. I mean, in our area, West Michigan, we've got a lot of places, and you probably have the same thing in Wisconsin, Jason, too, where there is, the CRC of North Blendon and the Reformed Church of North Blendon, and they share a parking lot, basically. These are neighbors that we know really well. I think there's a vast difference between the RCA of the Midwest here versus the RCA of the East, and I think that's something we've got to take into account. But also, just fundamentally, I remember back in our discussions over the form of subscription. Was that 2012 or right around there, where we
Sounds right.
From the form of subscription to the covenant for office bearers? And one of the distinct differences was that in the RCA, they had a form of subscription, but it was the confessions agree, or insofar as the confessions agree with the Word of God. Where we in the CRC say that the confessions do agree with the Word of God. Now, we're not putting them on par with Scripture, but we say what we confess in the three forms of unity is what Scripture is teaching us. They have already, in that fundamental document, said, well, if we see that it doesn't agree, we kind of have an individual ability to disagree with that. That actually goes back to 1837 and the Afscheiding back in the Netherlands. Yeah. And so these things reach back for a long way. And we're seeing a very practical way that that's being played out in our day and age with the issues of human sexuality. And so I do think that is something that needs to be reevaluated. Now, I sit here in Holland, Michigan, and Hope College is 30 feet out the back of this window behind my head. And Western Seminary is just a couple of blocks over. And hey, I'm thankful for those institutions. I'm thankful for the good things that they do. But this is very much an RCA town, so we have a lot of RCA influence in Holland. And frankly, our classes and the RCA classes have historically had a very close working relationship. We probably went for 15 years in my classes where every church plant was going to be a merger. It was going to be a union church. It was going to be a CRC, RCA church plant. And that was the only way we were going to plant them. Pillar Church is just a block up the road, and they're a testimony to the coming back of the denomination. In 2012, they did that as well. They reestablished themselves as an RCA, CRC congregation. So we have several of those. Our relationship with the RCA is not just a theoretical thing, it's a very practical thing. And so this will have to be done very carefully. There's lots of ministers. We have almost 30 churches in our classes. 10 of them are served by RCA senior pastors. We have a lot of associate pastors in our classes. There's 19 RCA associate or pastors, associate or senior, that are registered with our classes. And so there's going to be a lot of very practical, personal stuff that's going to be affected by our relationship with them. But we still need to evaluate this. Is this the right place to be? Are we able to go forward as genuine partners in the future? And how much do these historic fundamental differences play out in the way we engage ministry each and every day?
Yeah. And so it sounds like we do have an overture coming, asking to begin the process of ending being in communion with the RCA. So we have one overture asking to begin the process of ending that, and then the EIRC saying we're good. And so there is going to be a little tension between those two reports coming.
Very much so.
And the advisory committee is going to have to do some work on that, is what it looks like. I do want to mention a couple more things as we start to there's a couple I want to talk about. We're not wrapping up too quickly, but I do want to, one overture just struck me as interesting, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it. It's Overture 10 coming out of Grand Rapids South. And it's asking a question about baptism, and it's kind of making a point that maybe Synod 2024's decisions around human sexuality have confused things around baptism. And I didn't get my head around it fully. Do you guys want to clarify what that overture is and what they're asking for?
Well, it's a multiple page overture. There's a few places that I underline. They talk about what Synod 2024 decided, and then they say this: applying this statement to the baptismal rite is problematic because our church order recognizes there are a number of factors involved that only a consistory can discern. So they want the CRC to say the consistory has a final authority on who is baptized and who is not. So they mention the sentence appears to be a blanket prohibition of baptism being offered to children of same-sex couples, and thereby it takes away the authority of a local consistory to discern how God is working in a particular situation. Now, I think that they might have an argument on a technical level here, because there are innumerable situations that might present itself when it comes to baptizing a child. However, the overture does mention many times that baptism is a sacrament of the Church Universal, i.e., not just the CRC. And that, to me, I think undermines their entire point. If baptism is not just something of the CRC, but is something of the Church Universal, then we need to be taking into account the Church Universal when we are doing baptism. If someone baptizes a child of a married same-sex couple, for example, that affects us all then. If this is a sacrament of the Universal Church. So I think that their own overture kind of undermines their position. I mean, they say here, therefore, no child of a same-sex couple should be barred from baptism if the local authority, the consistory, has given its consent. That is what this overture really wants, and so it appears to be a backdoor circumvention of what the previous synods have decided.
Mm-hmm. It is fascinating. Yeah, there is no way Synod, as a binational gathering, could get into every situation and say, yeah, this is a legit baptism, that one is not a legit baptism. But that's not what Synod has been trying to do the last few years. It's setting up the broad parameters. We do have this already established that those members who are in good standing they have the privilege of having their children baptized. So you get back to that point of what is good standing. Now, every congregation and every consistory is the one that has to vet that, and they have to be the ones to know these individuals and know these families. But we do have things that we have decided in a broader context, in the broader assemblies, what puts a person outside of member in good standing. And it has been very clear, and not even close in terms of the votes, but even in the discussion, that those who are in same-sex relationships, they're not members in good standing. And so they would not have the privilege of bringing their children to the Lord's Supper. They're not the only ones who would not be in good standing. Any of us could be not in good standing, depending on how we are living out our faith, or inconsistently living our faith, or living against our faith, all of those things. And so I think that's one of the things. I do agree. The consistory is the one who has the ultimate authority. They do. But that ultimate authority is not ultimate authority in terms of being able to determine what is good standing and what is not good standing. We have covenanted together on our understanding of what Scripture has said in terms of what is the life of a Christian? What does that look like? And hey, we've got a whole section of the Catechism, the gratitude section, which spells that out very clearly in many circumstances. So,
and who I baptize here in North Blendon in Zeeland affects the whole Christian Reformed Church. If I
Absolutely.
decided, for example, that I was going to rebaptize anybody who requested it, that is pertinent to everybody else's baptisms in our covenant. And so and so the classes would have full authority to say, Aaron, you better shape up or ship out here. And so I just think that if baptism is a sacrament of the Church Universal, then we need to be exercising it as such.
Yeah. It does seem like it's one of those issues where they're trying to create confusion where there is not confusion. I'm like, it seems pretty like a member in good standing. That's a pretty clear statement, and all Synod's been doing is clarifying who those members are in certain circumstances, but not taking away authority from the local church. And so it does seem to be rehashing some of the conversation and debate we've had for the last 3-4 years, definitely. But like I said, I didn't dive into it deeply. That was helpful to help me understand it. And I don't necessarily think it will get any traction, but it just seems like, yeah, introducing confusion where there isn't any, and or there shouldn't be. And I thought it'd be helpful to talk about it. I do want to briefly. Do you have something to say?
I want to follow back up with that. I do think that's one of the things. If we talk to delegates and just in general, but make sure you're not overlooking the little overtures or the one-off overtures, because we don't want to, as delegates, you can't fall asleep on some of these issues because they can come through, and oftentimes through Synod, things come at us rapid fire. And so it's hard to even keep up, but just being aware of some of the dangers, but also some of the benefits, because there are overtures that too, they kind of open a door for ministry for us. And we want to make sure we're seeing that, but those that align with the Word of God and are consistent with our confessions. And so don't fall asleep on an overture like this one, even though it seems to be off on its own.
Yeah, 100%. I also noticed a couple of overtures coming regarding the banner. Do you guys, what thoughts do you guys have on those overtures that are coming?
Well, let me answer that one. I don't write for the banner very often. Actually, I never write for the banner. So I read it. So that's my perspective on this. I think those overtures, I think it's good to rethink what is the purpose for the banner. I think this is just a general conversation anyway. We've seen over the course of time, I mean, back in the day when the banner was a weekly publication, went to twice a month, and then it became a monthly publication, and it couldn't sustain itself on subscription, so it became something that was supported by ministry shares and sent to every household. And now I don't even know how it's exactly distributed. I know for our own congregation, we get X number of them, and we put them out, and whoever wants to take one takes them, and we throw the others away at the end of the month. And it doesn't seem to be a format or an avenue to communicate like it was in past generations. I think just fundamentally, that's part of it. I don't know what the future is for the banner. I know we can lament having this space where it's our space. It's the Christian Reformed churches. We've called it the kitchen table sort of thing. And the CRC is becoming less and less a kitchen table denomination, even as we have broadened and expanded. Now, I think we need to still foster those communications and those discussions, but I don't think a printed magazine is going to be that place. Now, they do have an online presence. I understand that. But it doesn't seem to be something that's going to take a lot of time. I think the banner is going to go in the way of the dinosaur a bit. I'd love to see it revamped in some other way, but it does need to have a clear mandate as to where it's supposed to go.
Yeah. And I would say that I don't agree with everything that the banner prints, but there are some very outstanding articles in the banner written by somebody named Aaron Vriesman. You should check them out.
They are actually really good. I'll vouch for that, for Aaron.
Yeah, there is I mean, I've been pretty clear on my thoughts on the banner. And there are some, I should take an opportunity to say there are some good articles occasionally, but that's about all I can say, to be honest. And that's not just trying to be bitter, but occasionally there are really good ones, but most of it I find unhelpful. And I feel no loss in my life that I do not read the banner very often. Like I skim through it and I feel And so that just shows that there's something missing there. It's not really meeting the need of the moment. I don't think. And so whatever that is, I'm still kind of an old fashioned guy. I'm really techie. I mean, I love using technology and, I've got a podcast and all of that, but I don't want to see magazines go away. I think there's a beauty of having some hard copy stuff, but maybe the banner's not the opportunity right now, right? Maybe. So I think the overtures are calling for kind of a redoing of their mandate, right? I think trying to, my assumption is encourage it to be less of the kitchen table where we're representing all sides of the point to being more like, hey, we're going to be promoting and defending the doctrines of the Christian Reformed Church. Am I right in that kind of being what they're requesting?
That's what I have seen in there as well. And I understand there's a place to be provocative, to question things and whatnot, but we see so little promotion and really support for the positions of the denomination or even our own confessions, just understanding. And yeah, it seems like we're always just kind of like, do they really say this? Do they really say that? And so everything is just kind of muddled, and it seems like it just makes things more cloudy and murky. It would be great to have some articles that just make our confessions sing, that we see the gospel proclaimed beautifully, and expositions of scripture. And I think those could be great encouragements to say, hey, you are in the Christian Reformed Church. It's not just because you're Dutch. It's not just because you live in West Michigan or Northwest Iowa or any of those enclaves, but there's something beautiful about the Reformed understanding of Scripture. And let's see that beauty. Let's let that beauty be put on display. And I feel we see that very rarely in the banner. For this whole idea of a kitchen table, we're going to just try to jab at it and poke at it, and we can poke at it, we can jab at it, we can look at it honestly, our Reformed faith, but there's a lot of beauty here that we need to see, and if the banner could bring some of that, give us a reason to say, yes, we love being Christian Reformed Church, we love being CRC, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's the thing that I've said I've been longing for from denominational leaders. And I would say from our denominational publication, I've been longing for anyone up in that level to say, yes, we're excited about the decisions of these last few synods. We're so excited to be CRC. We're excited about the direction we're heading. And we don't see that, right? We just see a lot of people, like, especially from the banner. Most of the stuff I've been seeing for the last 4 years, coming out of Synod has been like, oh, this is bad. This isn't good. We're really sorry about the decisions we've made. And that kind of there's been no excitement about what we truly believe. And I keep trying to tell people, like, if we're talking about reaching younger generations, a younger generation is, the people talk about authenticity and all of that, but authenticity, one of the ways that people are authentic is you just are unashamed about what you believe. You're just like, hey, this is what we believe, and of course we think it's really good. We could be friends and disagree on this, but we're really excited about what we believe. And young people are like, I'm down with that. We can disagree but I appreciate that you wholeheartedly believe what you say you believe. I find that authentic, right? And I think that's a big thing for us moving forward in the Christian Reformed Church. Let's just be unashamedly reformed and excited about it.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, that even is outside of the decisions of the last few years. I mean, I'm thankful for them. I'm thankful for the way the Lord has been moving in answer to prayer and all these things. But let's be excited to be reformed. Let's be excited to be those who uphold the gospel and the doctrines of grace and the beauty of God's sovereignty. And as expressed in our confessions, there's a lot to be excited about there. And I see future upcoming generations that are excited about this. And so this is our opportunity to feed into that. And people are looking for some grounding, something, a foundation upon which to stand. And boy, we have that great thing that's been passed down to us. So let's live in it.
Amen. But just one final question here. I'll kind of let you guys throw it out there because there's other overtures on a number of things. Are there any other kind of interesting overtures you thought would be worth pointing out or commenting on as we wrap up?
I think related to that last conversation, Overture 8 about celebrating the 1700 anniversary of the Nicene Creed. Let's celebrate those things. I know my co-pastor and I, my associate, we are looking at doing a sermon series through the Nicene Creed. And Kevin DeYoung has a new little booklet out on the Nicene Creed. He's been speaking on it. There's also a website, nicene.org, and just ways to kind of promote what do we understand when we confess the Nicene Creed. We will talk about the Apostles' Creed because that comes through in the Heidelberg Catechism. But I love that. I think that's something that would be great to see us grab hold of. I know that's probably not going to be the rally cry for the denomination, but it's something that we should be marking along the way. And I think related to that, I think this is more on a negative side. We kind of have the resurrection of the Belhar Confession. Somebody has suggested that we revisit that or consider having that put in the contemporary, the same category as the contemporary testimony. I know that was brought to the denomination several years ago. I don't see any really new grounds for reconsidering it because I thought we considered that very deeply. And I thought
Acts of Synod 2017, page 707 to be specific. I was at that synod, and I was part of those discussions and decisions. And I think it's interesting that the overture says, while preparing our delegates to sign the covenant for office bearers in accordance with Synod 2024's guidance, we discovered that the document had not been updated to include Synod 2017's adoption of the Belhar Confession as a contemporary testimony. No, that was very deliberate, and that was intentional. And I, like I said, and honestly, the overture has no grounds. It just has an overture on it saying, please include it. There's no grounds given here. So not only are there no new grounds, there's no grounds at all. I think that this one should be passed until sufficiently new grounds can be produced.
Well, technically, I think you could probably go through some of the background and find grounds in there. It's just a poorly written overture. Whoever probably didn't take the overture writing class in seminary when they put this one together. And fortunately, their classes, was this sent by a classis or was this just by an individual church?
Classis Hackensack.
Classis Hackensack, yeah. So anyway, that's part of the problem there too. But it's something we've already gone through this discussion. We don't have to have this discussion again. There's really nothing new that's being presented here. The overture is a bit embarrassing, by the way they're missing the conversation that happened before, or misrepresenting it, or just kind of missing it altogether. I do want to highlight just a couple of quick things. I think there's a couple of other beautiful things in these overtures. They're asking for, how do we think about healthy pastor spouses? That's something that's good to think about. I mean, however we do that, there's a couple of overtures even on office bearer training. And I think we're seeing the need for that, especially as we've come through the last few years of our office bearers understanding what we believe and why we believe it. An overture on, or maybe it's even a communication on emphasizing church planting. So some of those things, those are the exciting things that kind of help us move forward as a denomination and think about what is our call, what is our mission for the kingdom of Christ. And so, so those are good things that I hope get some light of day at Synod, but we'll see.
Yeah, those all seem to be like what we've been hoping to get to, right? We're like on the other side of this debate that we've been, that's been happening for the last 4 or 5 years. We want to get to raising up leaders and planting churches and decide, these are the things we want to get to. And, hopefully some of these other things can be put to bed a little bit more at this Synod again. I mean, last year was pretty decisive, but kind of just, there's always a little uneasiness, right? People are worried things are going to get overturned, but just kind of put some of this to bed so we can move on to rebuilding, or not even rebuilding a little bit, but just building as a denomination.
Well, I think, Jason, that's an important emphasis to have. We hear a lot of lament and mourning, and there was a time for that, right, in our denomination. But we also have this great confidence that Christ has said he will build his church, and we can rest in that. With all the negative discussions that have been happening, and even the laments of churches that are leaving, yeah, I wish they weren't. I wish they were coming back into covenant with us. But the Lord has the Christian Reformed Church. We're here to serve his purposes, not our own, to build his kingdom, not our kingdoms. And his kingdom will prevail. And we can be absolutely assured of that. So there's a lot of things to be hopeful for and positive toward in the Christian Reformed Church.
And while the last few synods have been about what we disagree on, and there's been a lot of clashes, there's a lot of things that now that this is starting to get settled, there's a lot that we can agree on, like the importance of church planting, the importance of discipleship, the importance of office bearer training, the importance of evangelism. These are things that we could and should be talking about, dealing with the things that the CRC needs to deal with. And now that this very critical matter is starting to get behind us, we can start to have those discussions in productive ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. Yeah. I guess I would just point out a couple of other things we haven't talked about. We talked mainly about overtures, but just wanting to make sure people don't, overlook. There's a report coming from a task force on the virtual church, which I think delegates make sure you're spending plenty of time reading through that, understanding it. My first glimpse is I would like it probably to land in a different place. So just read through it and kind of see. Yeah, I'm praying over that one. There's a task force that was put together to talk about, or maybe it wasn't a task force, but synodical pronouncements and the different authority at differing assemblies. That's coming to this one. And so,
and assisted suicide is another one that I think is important. My classes brought the overture saying, hey, the denomination needs a stance on this, especially with many states in Canada having laws allowing this. Yeah. And I haven't gotten through all the report yet, but the parts that I have read are a little lackluster. So I was kind of hoping for something more definitive.
Well, our brothers and sisters north of the border, I know we're all Americans here, but in Canada with MAID, they're facing this head on. I mean, in their own family members. I remember just 2 synods ago in 2023, 2 of my fellow officers were Canadian, and just the weight that this put upon either of them in their own congregations, in their own families of, this is something we need to speak very clearly on, and we can speak clearly on. This is the Reformed faith has a great theology of humanity, right? And so it's a place for us to speak very clearly, and this is an opportunity to do that.
Amen. Yeah, I think that kind of covers, we didn't obviously hit everything, but kind of covers some of the broad categories, and hopefully that helps fill listeners in, gives them an idea of what's coming up to Synod. And we would just encourage you, if you're a delegate, to be doing the work and preparing well and studying for that. And if you're not a delegate, be praying. And be praying for the delegates, that they would have strength and wisdom and insight, and that the Lord would continue to build his church through the work of. Do either of you have kind of a final word you want to give our listeners as they think about the upcoming synod?
I would say the same thing. Don't fret. This is the Lord's church. He's going to build it, and synods rise and fall, and but the Lord will remain forever and remain steadfast.
And I would. And I agree with that. I would just mention the importance of prayer. I think that prayer is much more powerful than we even realize. And I would say that one person praying is much more powerful than a person being a delegate at Synod and casting a vote. The Lord can work in hearts and minds in ways that we cannot. And I think that let's not underestimate the importance of praying for Synod, the Christian Reformed Church, the delegates, and God's leading in all of this.
That's all we have for this week. If you want to help us out and support the Messy Reformation, another thing you can do is sign up for our newsletter through Substack. That way you'll get episodes and summaries sent directly into your email inbox. It also gives us the ability to communicate with our audience, which is one of the biggest struggles of a podcast. So head over to the Messy Reformation on Substack and sign up for our newsletter. But until then, don't forget this is Christ's church, and he bought it with his blood. And we've been warned that wolves will come in trying to destroy the flock. So keep a close watch on your life and on your doctrine. Preach the word in season and out of season, and keep fighting the good fight in this messy Reformation.